Hey, welcome to the Blurb. I'm your host, Glenn Porzig. After the episode, be sure to check out the blurb.tv for show notes and handy links. On today's episode, we'll discuss a book that can be described as Carlos Castaneda writes Pulp Fiction with a slice of Silence of the Lambs. Hey, this episode is brought to you by Fandom Outfitters. I'm a fan, you're a fan, let's be fans together. You can find their exclusive apparel at fandomoutfitters.com. Robb Hoff claims the Ohio River Valley is home from Maysville, Kentucky to Cincinnati and Louisville to Evansville, Indiana. But he also resided for a decade in the lush northern neck peninsula of Chesapeake Bay, Virginia. His writing career spans more than a decade of coverage for newspaper and magazine groups. His published novels include Cosmic Egg Rapture, the first of his exquisite corpse thriller series, and Contract with the Lycanthrope. I'd like to welcome Robb Hoff to the Blurb.
Good to be here, Glenn. Thanks for inviting me.
All right, this is the Blurb, so let's get right to it. And if you could, read us the blurb from your book, and we'll take it from there.
All right, I'll blurb away. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Full moon siphons souls with beams of pull. The power of the spirit shreds the flesh away. With its backdrop of U.S. Supreme Court corruption and nuclear power plant sabotage, Contract with the Lycanthrope is one hairy ride into the grisly domain of the werewolf beast, whose ancient origins reveal that source of his otherworldly power. Through twists and turns that test reality, Robb Hoff's launch of his Lycanthrope series is an odyssey across a horrific landscape that careens between the supernatural and insane. I like saying that word.
Insane.
Yes. Unsane.
Unsane.
Yeah.
Wow, that sounds really interesting, actually. Lots going on there.
Yeah, there was a lot that went into it, and I was pleased with the way it turns out. It's on Kindle now. The trade paperback version's due out from Hydra Publications before too much longer, and the Audible auditions just went up on ACX, so hopefully that audio title will be forthcoming as well.
All right, sounds good. I'm a big fan of audiobooks. I always like to hear when more books are coming on audio. It's easier for me to find time to listen to a book than it is to read. As an author, I'm sure you know, if you've got free time, you should be writing, right?
Absolutely. And Hydra does have quite a few titles on audio that are available. And I did an audiobook myself years and years ago. I had a lot of fun doing it. Almost wanted to do it again on my own, but opted not to go that route this time.
Yeah, it leaves more time for writing if you're not taking all the time to do the audiobook yourself.
Oh, absolutely. Finding the time to write that's the chore.
All right. Your book's got an interesting title. You want to go into that a little bit? Is it part of a series? Was there a working title at some point, or has this always been the title of the book?
Well, this has always been the title for this book. Now there was kind of a predecessor to it, not necessarily the first book of the series, because it was written over 20 years ago, the Crackers for the Lycanthrope, which was set in primarily Red River Gorge in Kentucky. This book evolved out of that 20 some plus years later. And so I kept the Lycanthrope theme with this, and there are actually characters that do appear in this book that were in the first. And there's the possibility that this Lycanthrope series might include the first book as a prequel if I go back and do that. So yeah, this is definitely a series one way or the other, but as this stands, you could read this as a standalone, but it is the first book of this series. So yeah.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. What genre is this under? If someone went to look on the bookshelf at the local bookstore and what genre would it be listed under?
Well, the primary genre would be horror, and further subgenre specified would be occult horror. It does fall into supernatural thriller. There are, elements of, paranormal suspense, and to me, it's kind of like, the way I describe it, it's like Pulp Fiction meets Carlos Castaneda. So there's a lot of action in this, right? Pretty much from the start. There's a lot of activity going on that you would see on Pulp Fiction, or you would read. I don't know if you're familiar with the Carlos Castaneda books from the 70s and 80s, but they dealt with a lot of kind of otherworldly astral travel type scenarios and perceptual shifts that were not of this world, but were, what do you know, they were in this world. So yeah, it's got that going on.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot going on with this book. Um, so, if you weren't writing in this genre, is there another genre you think you'd be writing in?
Well, like the first book that I wrote for Hydra Publications, also in earlier in 2018, was more embodied in the paranormal suspense genre, but again had the same kind of supernatural thriller feel to it. And there's a commonality kind of between the two books, because for a long time as you're reading this, it's like, is this real or not? And the characters are also wondering what is real and what's not real. But if I wasn't writing in that type of fiction, I probably would just be writing nonfiction, which is really more of my background both as a journalist for newspaper groups and magazine also, but with nonfiction book projects with other writers as a collaborator, both non-credited and credited.
All right. When you were doing research for the book, was there anything really surprising that you ran across? I know there's a lot of really crazy topics covered in your book, so I'm sure you ran across something.
Well, one of the foremost, and this comes out early on in the book, and I really wasn't researching this for the book, but a friend of mine had been on the USS Iowa when it blew up, and it was a tragic loss of life. And he actually was there to go into the turret that blew up. So it goes into, at the time, when he had returned from the Navy, actually to Louisville. I'd spent considerable time talking with him about it, and also wrote a lot of notes about it that I kept. And when the time came to write this book, probably 4 or 5 years later, in terms of putting together this one scene, it was, it was interesting to see all the details that went into why that turret actually exploded. So that was one. I had to do a lot of research on nuclear power plants just to get some, even though it doesn't get into the real highly technical description of what exactly is going to happen to this plant. There was enough there that it had to, portray it, as realistically as possible, given the parameter that I had set for this to be explored. So I did a lot of research on like Fermi outside of Detroit, a sodium cooled breeder reactor that was designed to produce a lot of fuel as well. So, and tracked a lot of stuff into Tennessee, and that also came into play because the first book, the first Lycanthrope book, that's not part of the series but could be the prequel. It was set in Red River Gorge. So I did a lot, and I even put this in the book about how the Red River Gorge was spared, from being dammed and flooded into an impoundment by the Tennessee Valley Authority, and how, the Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas actually came to the site and was more or less instrumental in preserving that. However, in contract with the Lycanthrope, that kind of strain of research led me off into Tellico Lake and the damming of the Little Tennessee River, which resulted in, several, Cherokee cities, capital like Chota, were, submerged forever. And of course, it had a lot to do with the whole, snail darter controversy and that type of thing. But
Hmm.
the Supreme Court justice stuff, because one of the main characters who really doesn't, you know, he comes across more as this agency that causes things to happen, is called the judge, and he's actually a a potential nominee for the Supreme Court of the United States, and that that gets folded into this as well. Just that process, how it goes, it factors into the plot while these other characters are bearing the brunt of uh, his effort to make sure that there's no challengers left alive to his. So guns come out of blazing. There's a host of characters that are probably quite memorable in a lot of ways. So, and the whole lycanthrope trope is right there with a little psychotropic element added in. So there's a whole Welsh legend involved, and it gets some historical backdrop on that side. So it kind of ends up at the Falls of the Ohio, actually near Louisville. So
Oh, sounds really cool. What got the ball rolling on this? I mean, I know you said you had written a book, previously, which may be a prequel, but what really got you going down this path?
well, with Hydra, the I wrote Cosmic Egg Rapture, it just came really out of nowhere and became evolved into this kind of experimental. Let's for whatever this Salvador Dali performance from 1965 popped into my head, and one of my best friends for a long time, who unfortunately passed away last year, William R. Fix, was kind of a prolific alternative history writer in the 70s and 80s with titles like the Star Maps and Pyramid Odyssey and
Hmm.
Bone Peddlers and Lake of Memory Rising. So it had a lot of you know uh, details really that dealt with this kind of arcane knowledge, like Edgar Casey, the ancient Egyptian pyramids, and like the Hermes Trismegistic literature, that type of thing. But once I did that and realized that Hydra's preference was for series, I thought, well, this would make I could make a second series. And that's where the Lycanthrope book came in. And frankly, I owe a little debt of gratitude to Hydra author Arlen Andrews, who was with me and another writer out of Louisville, Sarah Thompson, who wrote the Otherware series through Curiosity Quills Press. At the Spire at the Hyatt Regency, we were there for a thing called Books in Bourbon Country, and Sarah read my tarot. She did a tarot card reading, and threes and twos kept coming up, and we were going back and forth what 3 + 2 could mean. And that's when Arlen jumped in and said, being the Mensa that he is, said, maybe it's 3 x 2. And I was like, oh, okay, 2 series of books, 3 books in each series. So, and then I had a draft of this book around because there was no hard file of it, because I had actually penned a lot of this previously. And I called the person that did some of the editing on it, and had been on a floppy disk back in the 90s. She didn't have it, and fortunately, I had the boxes that I hadn't even probably opened from the time I had moved from this region to Virginia, and then back 10 years later, I found one hard copy left, and I started from there.
Oh, wow. Wow. So there's a story behind the book being made too. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned Kentucky and Tennessee. Are those the main areas that it takes place? And
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't really specify that, hey, you're in Kentucky now, but starts out in kind of a urban setting and then moves quickly to a rural setting with a lake and all manner of other uh, you know rustic and rural ambience attached to it. So it pretty much is modeled from a trip from, say, Louisville, Kentucky to uh, Tellico Dam. That's how I kind of patterned it.
cool.
And the action kind of takes place within 3 or 4 days. So it's very, very time, uh, you know, dated in terms of its action and sequence.
So, avoiding too many spoilers, do you want to tell us a little bit about your main character?
Well, there's the main character's name is Doc, and he's not a doctor, although he is working on his master's degree at the time when he decides to leave his previous life of crime and corruption. But he finds himself involved in this milieu that surfaces around this Supreme Court justice nominee or potential nominee. And once he finds that he's, part of what this judge has to take care of before things get finalized, that's when all the action starts, and it's fearsome. There's gunplay. It's violent. It's a lot of that, and there's a lot of language that would correspond to people who aren't necessarily, you know, going to work from 9 to 5 every day. So,
So I like to speculate about like dream casting. Is there someone you had in mind, or someone you think would be good to play
uh,
the part, either living or dead?
well, I'd have to say for the closest to home cosplay, I would start off with, because there is a character uh, in the book, Claudia, she carries as much weight as the main character, Doc. In fact, they're together, and it's their journey in a lot of respects. But uh, her name's Chrissy Rose. She's an excellent cosplayer, does a lot of really wonderful anime stuff, and I'm hopeful that she's got a copy of the book, of the Kindle version, and hopefully that will materialize. But as far as like the screen, I mean, I'm not actively kind of pursuing any screen options at this point, although with Hydra, you never know. There's been some inroads made there with a couple of the writers, publishers who have had some success getting deals done that way. But I would say I just saw the Dick Cheney trailer with
Oh,
Christian
Vice.
Bale.
Yeah.
Yeah, Vice. He's one of the most the to see him from American Hustle to American Psycho was like, this is not the same individual. And to see him in different movies, that he's the fighter one he was in, um, I think if he could recapture his American Psycho form, that he would be like someone who I would, or a younger version of that. Now there's also, who wouldn't want to see Johnny Depp unleash his inner lycanthrope? I mean, he's another one of those amazing kind of transfiguring type actors to watch, who seems to be able to do what few others can really do. But as far as the lead with Claudia, there's an actress that I just recently watched in the Goliath series, Tanya Raymond, who just absolutely captivated me and had all the nuances I think that would come across with this character. Because I don't know if you're familiar with Goliath, but she does play an escort as well as Billy Bob Thornton's paralegal. Go figure. Some guys got all the luck, I guess. I don't know, but she was fantastic. And Claudia is an escort in my book, so I think she would be great at that. Now, there's another actress that, just on a side note, with Cosmic Egg Rapture, who I think just looks spit on the cover. Her name's Jenny Mitchell, and she does a lot of TV series stuff. And I would love to see something, her and that, with that book, or specifically with Contract with Lycanthrope. I'd say Tanya Raymond would be ideal.
And fun to say too, right?
Yeah, if you spell it right. I kept thinking it was Redmond, but it's Raymond. So yeah, and I've watched a couple interviews with her too, and I did watch I think I watched all the first two. Kind of binged on the Goliath series, which I thought was great. Not a lot of paranormal stuff, but some very strange, weird things going on. And that first season had William Hurt, who was like, he's a brilliant actor as well.
Mm-hmm.
Billy Bob, man, he's definitely done a bunch.
So, fans of what other author or series do you think would enjoy your book?
I would say fans of, you know, uh, well, horror, cult horror, but really with this kind of action-driven plot, like you would see in a Pulp Fiction,
Hmm.
where it's not just so much like gory slasher, don't go into that house or this barn type of thing. It's there's kind of more going on. This is more like don't open the glove box. Whatever you do, don't open the glove box. But the from a standpoint of some of the actual occurrences that take place that would be considered like supernatural, paranormal. Anyone who's read any Carlos Castaneda, going back from the whole Don Juan Matus, chronicle when he went, or Castaneda went as a UCLA anthropology doctoral candidate to the Sonora Mountains in Mexico to meet with Don Juan and learn the ways of the Yaqui Indian sorcery. They would, and that there was, I don't know how many books were there in that 15. I probably read them all, but anybody, Tales of Power, Journey to Ixtlan, all those types of, are they novels or not novels? We don't know, but if you're into that kind of activity and reading, then this would definitely fall along those lines.
Cool. So, along those lines, any favorite authors or anyone that you'd say inspired you? Obviously, Carlos there sounds like he was an inspiration.
Well, before there was Carlos Castaneda, there was one Carlos Kolchak, or actually just Carl, as he was known in Chicago at the time. Most people remember Darren McGavin as the dad in Christmas Story, which I was actually, the first time I saw that, I was just so deeply crushed. Here was my, childhood hero running around in his cheap suit and his straw hat with a camera, getting in the middle of just all kinds of unearthly mayhem week after week. And there he is, on the Christmas Story. I'm like, no, the Carl Kolchak Night Stalker. I just remember so vividly because it came on when I was a kid, prime time. And I mean, like when I really first started to write, like in the second grade, I had a teacher in Cincinnati that, that was the first time I really created writing. Everything that came out of me was just really horrific, twisted in a good way. The twists were like a tornado that was personified, and Trick or Treat where the roles were reversed and stuff. So but all those Carl Kolchak episodes really formed in my mind, I think, a lot of the way I would approach writing later, which with fiction is weird because for the most part, like I say, I've done a lot of journalism, a lot of nonfiction projects where it has really nothing to do with, paranormal or, horror. Well, some of the stuff might have horror elements to it in real life, but, that really stayed with me. And then from there, starting to read early on Edgar Allan Poe. Of course, that's kind of cliche, but true, because some of those stories, from the Black Cat up to the, Cask of Amontillado, that was one of my favorites of all time. But those really formed in me that type of precursor mentality. And it went, from a more literary side to say a Franz Kafka or Jorge Luis Borges to, other mainstream writers that people might be more familiar with, especially from those that whose works were, translated into visual, film and TV. But Salem's Lot would be a good example. I also remember as a kid when that came out on TV, and that was pretty powerful stuff there. But as far as today, I really try to keep. I try to group my reading around stuff I know I need to research. For instance, this book I'm working on has some Mayan. This is actually the sequel or the second book in the Cosmic Egg Rapture, series, which is called the Exquisite Corpse Thriller series. A lot of Mayan stuff there. So I did read a historical novel by a Eastern Kentucky prof, Kelly Carneal, called House of the Water Lily, which basically toggles back and forth between the same woman who's like as a young teenager who's a princess, and then there's this calamity that affects her and her family and the ruling class, and leads her to be later, as this narrator, as a grandmother on the run, trying to, you know, cobble together an existence and raise a grandchild. So, but it had a lot of those details from, you know, the 900s with the Mayan empire collapse. But I try to put things that aren't necessarily related to my own research as reviews on my website, robbhoffauthor.com. And like, you know, anywhere from one of the best books, well, probably the best book I read 2018 was Address the Color of the Sky, which was a French fairy tale type story that Jennifer Irwin wrote, and it's a really well done book. And then Nathan Day, Orphan Rising, his series, and he's published through Seventh Star Press and Stephen Zimmer and those folks. It's Sarah Thompson, who I mentioned. Tiffany Rice wrote a great book that's not erotica, although she's known mainly for that. This was, you know, really, it's on my website as well. They're called The Lucky Ones, and it's kind of got a lot of gothic components to it that fit really well, and it had a really cool story to it. So yeah, I do stuff like that.
So it sounds like you've been interested in writing since an early age. It sounds like there was a teacher that was partially responsible, I'd say, at least. But
Mrs. Crow.
Mrs. Crow.
With an
But
E on the end.
now, if you weren't writing, what do you think you'd be doing?
Well, it's like, you know, I'm a writer from the alpha to the omega here. I mean, I just, no matter what else I do, I always consider myself that and try to figure out. It's not even so much trying to figure out how to write, what to write or when. It's kind of like, what am I going to write? Because, you know, I have a lot of different interests. I write like a fishing column that I do on a monthly basis. I've written a ton about sports. I work for ESPN in the capacity as a remote researcher. I don't really write for them, but I've written a lot of other or a lot of sports stuff for other websites, you know, Yahoo and Rant and other things like that. But so I can't really imagine not writing. Although there's that whole Twilight Zone episode with Burgess Meredith, where he's, you know, the end of the world, and he's got the whole library at his disposal, and he breaks his glasses. Well, you know, as long as I don't, you know, well anymore, you know, you don't even need your hands. So, but yeah, I would imagine I'll always be writing.
So you mentioned a lot of the different outlets that you write in. That's great. Do you have any strange or unusual hobbies?
Well, you've probably seen one of the stranger ones that I've decided to adopt here, and that's kind of, you know, going as dressed up as Salvador Dali when I do these conventions. And you know, you know, there's a method to the madness behind all that, but you know, donning the mustache and, you know, wearing a shirt with his painting and just trying to, you know, present that part of Cosmic Egg Rapture. Because to go back to, you know, the story about William R. Fix, one of the interesting things that happened during the time that I knew him was he had talked about this Salvador Dali performance in 1965, where Dali went to Manhattan, and it was to promote the sale of his worldwide lithography rights. And my friend Bill lived in Manhattan at the time of that performance in 1965, worked for GE in their film department, like corporate film. And years later, I can remember talking to him, and that's how Cosmic Egg Rapture starts, with this performance. And I can remember, as I first started to draft it, I was going by my memory of his description, you know, and I had this all written out. And then I thought, you know what? I bet that's got to be somewhere online. And sure enough, they recorded all those little performances that he did, and it is on. You can find them on YouTube or IMBD, I guess it is. But so then I had that to go by as well, and that kept factoring in. So the whole Salvador Dali there's a reenactment of that performance that one of the characters, the mentor character in this, who also kind of has dementia, in and out, and you're not sure if it's dementia or if he's suddenly transported to this other, Akashic records type realm of consciousness or not. So the Dali part with the whole, I tried to really capture the essence of a technique that Dali employed called the paranoid critical method, where he would induce this kind of hallucinatory state where everything felt like it was, in the process of, happening in an ordained way, and these forces were conspiring to get him to do the things that he was doing. So when I'm out doing my strange and unusual hobby, that's with my Salvador Dali stuff. Of course, with the Lycanthrope, it's going to be different. It's probably going to be more of a mask when I'm, doing that, and I'll probably gravitate more towards horror shows in the future. Yeah, I guess overall, I don't know how much of a hobby it is. As a writer, how much fun it is to go to these conventions, and Hyder has been great about that. Usually, they foot the bill for writers who want to go to these things to go in, and you just got to show up and do your thing with the public there, and to see all the cosplayers is cool.
Cool. Sounds like there are a couple series going on, a couple sequels coming out. Do you know what's next?
Well, yeah, the Cosmic Egg Rapture second book, the first draft is finished, and I finished that a while ago. I just haven't been able to. I need to clear the schedule, because you know how it is once you have a full book of some 80,000 words that's swirling around in your head. It kind of has to, assume its role in your consciousness at a greater level than it would, as when you're trying to market it or whatever. So I'm going to sit down, hopefully, if not before next week, starting in January, and that's going to be my focus, is to get that all ready, and then have the next, the second book of the Exquisite Corpse thriller series come out through Hydra.
Cool. All right. Well, where can people find you online?
If they want to buy copies of the book, through Amazon, you can do that. If you want to go to my website, robbhoffauthor.com, I put stuff up there, with the way, all the time constraints and so forth are. I mean, I try to get as much on there as I can when I can, and to do blogs, and there's a newsletter sign up that you can get onto from there. But that's Goodreads is another place where I'll, my stuff is listed, and I list the books that I'm reading and that type of thing. But I'm on, Twitter under Redlegs Robb with 2 B's. It is Robb with 2 B's. If you do any kind of Amazon search, ROBBHOFF, 2 B's, 2 F's. Instagram, I got a couple accounts, one Robb Hoff Lycanthrope, one Robb Hoff Chills of Kentucky. I do like LinkedIn. I'm on there, there's a lot of different variety of people connected on there doing different things you might not normally see on the other forms of social media. But that's, I'm pretty much on those avenues, media-wise, social media-wise. Facebook, got a Facebook author page.
Facebook. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. We will have a list of all those contact places at the blurb.tv. So I want to thank Robb for being our guest in our premiere episode. So that's pretty cool.
It's an honor, Glenn. It truly is an honor. It's been good to get to know you over the year, and I'm glad you decided to hand select me from the throng of writers to be the very first guest on your debut, The Blurb podcast. Thank you very much.
Thanks again to Robb Hoff for being our guest on our premiere episode. Anyone interested in finding out more about him, go to theblurb.tv. You'll find links to all of his social media accounts and his latest books. And if you enjoyed the program, remember to hit like and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And be sure to share this with all your friends. You can support the show by visiting our sponsors, buying our merch, shopping with our affiliate links, or becoming a patron. As always, thanks for your support, and we'll see you next time.